Hello and welcome to the Elemental Digital Decarbonisation Festival. Elemental is the community for professionals making waves in heat, water, air and energy. We have several thought-provoking discussions for you in play over the course of this festival. I'm Dhruti Shah and I'm today's host for the role of metrics in housing retrofit. Data is going to be key in the drive to decarbonise and also get to the net zero point. But with 4 million homes in the social housing sector and most of them requiring retrofitting, what role do data-led decisions even play? We're in a cost of living crisis and tenants need energy bills that they can afford. So using data helps both landlords and tenants. But what does this mean? And how feasible is it when every day the headlines are full of warnings over energy costs? Please note that this is a CPD accredited session and these are the learning objectives. So by the end of this webinar, we aim to equip our attendees, so all of you, with an understanding of how a data-led retrofit program will lead to better outcomes for both landlords and tenants. This will include a discussion on the type of data social landlords can collect, thermal imaging, and post-retrofit assessments. So let me introduce you to our fantastic panelists who come with a wide range of expertise. We have Hermione Creese, I hope that's correct, co-founder of environmental data company Parametrics, Andrew Parkin, Managing Director at Stroma Certification, and Chair of PEPA, Property Energy Professionals Association, Tim Freeman of Energy Specifics, and Stuart Little, founder and CEO of IRT Surveys, which means Infrared Thermographic Surveys, and that's part of the MEARS group. So hello, and thank you for coming along. But I'd like to start with morning. I'd like to start with a question for all of you. If you could introduce yourselves and also say how important is data to the work that you do. So Hermione, can I start with you first?
Yes, certainly. So I hope you can all hear me okay. I'm Hermione Creese. I am the CEO of Parametrics. What do Parametrics do? Well, we provide a tool set that helps monitor homes, gather data on their internal environments and turn that into measurements of performance on our software platform. It's a tool set that's designed for landlords, for the supply chain in retrofit projects and for professional advisors to use. It helps us to benchmark homes in terms of their heat loss, performance in keeping tenants comfortable, risk of condensation issues, and some measurements of how ventilation is happening in the house. I guess what that means is that data is absolutely the core of what we do. The environmental data from homes is very critical in allowing us to understand exactly how they're performing in delivering comfort and in delivering how they can be decarbonised. It's a critical, direct way of measuring which homes will respond best to retrofit. It helps to introduce some feedback into the design and build process. So for us, data its analysis is pretty much everything that we do.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. And Tim, are you able to give a little bit more information about who you are and what do you do?
Yes, good morning, everyone. Tim Freeman, I'm Managing Director of Energy Specifics. We are an end-to-end PAS 2035 compliance service and delivery service. So we carry out retrofit assessments, full in-house retrofit coordination, and we're in partnership with Constructive Thinking Studio, who are a firm of chartered architects based in Liverpool, on the retrofit design offering part of PAS 2035. We've done over 1,000 SHDF properties now, which are, by that I mean we've lodged them on Trustmark, they're finished, they're done. And data is absolutely central and key to every decision that we make as a single organisation or with constructive thinking. My business partners and I were very early on trained as retrofit coordinators in the very first batches in the country, and from day one of forming this, we've said that PAS 2035 is around two things, which is data and risk, and we use data to mitigate risk throughout the process, right from the very start, from the retrofit assessment through to the very end. If you don't have good data, actually everything in the middle of what you do is irrelevant. So data is key all the way through.
That's really, really helpful. So remember that data is really, really key. Andrew, how about you? Would you be able to give more of background in terms of what you do and also about yourself?
Absolutely, yes. Andrew Parkin, I work for Stroma Certification. We're one of the certification bodies within the PAS 2035 retrofit assessment, retrofit coordinator world. I'm also, for much longer than I've been around with the business, been involved in energy performance of buildings directive schemes. So that's domestic EPCs and commercial EPCs and decks, etc. I also work for, well, I have a role within Pepper as chair, who represent all the accreditation schemes within both of those worlds. I think Tim somewhat stole my thunder, which I suspected might happen, and we are going to sound a little bit like an echo chamber, but data is massively important. I think when we first started on this journey of measuring buildings and working out the energy efficiency of buildings, I think it was considered something that we just had to do, and we weren't really sure what the end goal was, other than we wanted to improve our buildings. As that sort of story sort of evolved, it has become all about the data, and using that data in smart ways, checking the data and ensuring that we're not using bad data, and there's some very clever processes now for taking the EPC data in particular and analysing it and removing bad data and retaining good data, and then pivoting it against other data points and making best use of it. There are some challenges around data at the moment in our world, which I'm sure we'll get to, and that's caused a few operational issues, particularly within the social housing providers world, and we're hoping to get around that very quickly in the next few months. But yeah, it's just highlighted the difficulty of, if we don't have that data, or we go back to a dumb world, we have ports and no back-end data, things fall apart very quickly.
Okay, that's really, really helpful. Thank you so much. And Stuart, would you be able to just do exactly the same?
Yeah, absolutely. And Andrew, you said that your thunder was stolen. I think all the thunder has been completely used up now. My background was in architecture. I spent 5 years in architecture, then spent 5 years in specification sales, for specifically in flat roofs and roof gardens. And it was kind of on that journey I realised that because an architect writes something and says, this is what I want it made of, doesn't necessarily translate to that's what's built. Then 21 years ago, I started IRT surveys with my brother and an investor called Dave Jones, who wrote Grand Theft Auto and David Beckham Soccer and what have you. And we went on this journey to thermal image buildings to prove the as-built true condition of properties. And then as the company grew, we got more and more into data, culminating in our DREAM software, which is always on the banner behind me. But that, just to echo what everyone else said, this net zero thing is a journey. And like any journey, we'll have to figure out where the starting point is. And data is critical to assess and ascertain exactly where you are. So you can't do anything unless you know where you're starting from. And then you need to track that data all the way along and create this digital twin. We've got to try and exploit data and cloud computing to avoid the mistakes of the past. I mean, we've all seen that the need for things like PAS 2035 can't be overstated. We've got to do it right this time. We can't go wasting taxpayers' money doing retrofits ineffectively and filling cavities with anything, drilling and filling, and just walking away like that's the problem solved. So, massive fan of data. It's critical for what we do. It's in every essence of our being, and that's the big elephant in the room, is that no one's data is good. I've never seen a client yet that's got perfect data.
Wow. So this is already an education. I just want to say to our audience, please don't hesitate to ask questions. Like, this is your time to really have access to these experts from all across the spectrum. So anything that you have in terms of question around data, in terms of how it's being used, that you've always wondered, please don't hesitate to put it into the question box that we have, the ask the question box, or into the chat, and we'll try and pick it up and ask away. But in the first instance, all of you are stressing how important data is, whether at the start of the journey, whether you're in the journey itself. In that instance, can we just delve a little bit further and find out what metrics do you actually use? And are those metrics for anybody to access? How does this actually work? So can we dive into the data, as it were? So I'm going to go with you, Tim, first on that one, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Well, I think we're quite unusual in the world of retrofit, because look, it's been a journey, as Andrew said. It's been a massive learning journey for us all from when PAS 2035 came out. I'm a big fan of PAS 2035 and PAS 2038, which we can also do for non-domestic, for commercial buildings, because it's finally given us a considered framework where when the measures aren't being installed in isolation. We're thinking about the buildings and the tenants within them. So the starting point of any building, which is usually an EPC, we find particularly frustrating, I have to say. So right from the start, our retrofit assessors are gathering more data than is strictly required under under the process that's out there that everyone uses. But I think where we differ fundamentally from almost everybody else out there is we are digitally twinning every single property. So in the same way that the thermal imaging is being done, that can provide some incredibly powerful data and guidance on properties. We're LiDAR scanning properties and creating these digital twins that are incredibly accurate. And
can I just interrupt for 1 second, just in case there are people who might not quite know what a digital twin is? Is it possible to just quickly give it a quick
absolutely.
definition?
So there's a government policy that, in theory, by 2030, they want the entire built stock of the UK to be digitally twinned. So we're using LiDAR technology, which is a laser technology. We scan the properties, which creates this thing called a point cloud, which is basically hundreds of thousands of millions of lines that create a 3D image. And from that, we can create a BIM model, building information model. And then using a combination of processes, some proprietary, others in-house, we're able to use on-construction SAP and some very detailed energy modeling to provide absolutely definitive data about that property. So what it allows us to do is then do retrofit designs that are based on really, really good data at the beginning. The retrofit assessment is fit for purpose, way better than just doing an EPC, but they both have limitations. So this is really providing a sort of full SAP approach with construction drawings and schedules and an architectural service effectively for each property based on data. And full SAP is a very powerful tool because it also gives you the net zero journey for each property. Because I think sometimes we can forget, things like the Social Housing Decarb Fund, EPCC 90 kilowatt hours is the target, but EPCC isn't actually the end target. BEIS want to see what's the journey for that property for net zero, what's the maximum it can do. And that for us means the medium-term improvement plan, although we'll do one at the beginning based on the retrofit assessment, actually will get revisited once we have the retrofit design, because funding comes into this. And funding is also, ironically, dependent on the data that we put into the bids. So the better the data, the more funding we can get. So it really does run right through the journey. And for us as coordinators, the starting data is, for me, it's the most frustrating element of the job. Hermione, I'm sure will have something to say on this. It's easy to put monitoring in at the end of the job, but actually, aside of full SAP at the beginning, we're really keen to see the data up front. To get good data, as a coordinator, I'd like to see the bills in particular from a year before the jobs start on site, because over the course of a year, we'll have all the seasons. On the basis the occupancy doesn't change, we can actually get a feel for it. And we're not in the position now of saying we're going to reduce people's fuel bills because the price cap keeps going up at such an exponential rate. It's impossible to say that. We can only say we're going to reduce the fuel demand, the heat load demand within that property. And that's why we need as much quality data as we can get at the beginning. And then we can use it for monitoring purposes post installation, to prove that the measures are correct. So if we've got good data, the designs are going to be better. But post installation to see how it's performing, and crucially, and we don't talk enough about this because it's such a big challenge out there, are the tenants playing their part in this journey? Because we've all seen blocked vents, fuses being taken out, wet clothes on radiators, over occupation, door shuts, and who knows what goes on behind. We don't want to pry on people's private lives, but we do. I feel there's a contract there where, if we're improving these properties, we need them on the journey with us as well, and that's a challenge without a doubt.
Thank you so much for that. And Hermione, do you want to jump in on that bit? And then I would definitely want to go to Stuart and Andrew as well.
Yeah, I will. And there is a danger I will slightly geek out here, which is what tends to happen when anyone asks me about metrics. We are, compared to other people on this panel, we are relatively new kids on the block, because only over the past 2 or 3 years has the cost of monitoring got to a point where you can monitor at sufficient quality to do the sort of analyses and metrics that we want to generate for each home. So this means that actually for us, the challenge is which metrics really are the ones that drive value in the retrofit process. And the ones that we definitely are finding of most use to anchoring the sort of activities that Tim is doing, and potentially to anchor in other processes like EPC caps in the future, are measurements around heat loss. And around those, there are other contextual measurements that help people understand the existing performance of their stock. For example, the risk of a condensation problem, the basic performance of how well a home is doing at delivering the right temperature for those who are occupying it. But I think Tim is quite right. This data is really important to understand which homes are going to respond best to retrofit, where the greatest potential for your returns on your retrofit budget are. This is the sort of pre-flight works that allows you to really plan what your project would look like. So we have a very wide range of other things that we could look at within this from the environmental and the energy data that we collect, but we're really focusing on the sort of the core anchoring metrics that are to do with the home's ability fundamentally to deliver comfort in an energy efficient way.
Seems like there's quite a lot involved actually in terms of the different elements and how they actually tie together. So in that respect, can I bring you in, Stuart, in terms of how important that data is and just bouncing off of our two panelists thus far?
No, I was making notes when you were both speaking there. Tim, to answer your point about engaging the tenant, I totally agree. You cannot involve the tenants early enough in social housing, decarb projects. We've got tenants who won't let us into the attic to move the Christmas tree. Therefore, we can't insulate the attic. Therefore, we can't get to 50 kilowatt hours per square metre. Therefore, they cannot get an £80,000 retrofit because of something so simple. And now they're padlocking access to all the attics, so people can't store anything in the attic. I think the bill thing is really critical. If I could wave a magic wand, I would say, please let us have access to all the bills, government. They're so paranoid about GDPR and people reverse engineering it to work out who's letting their house on Airbnb that they shouldn't be. And it prevents us making proper steps forward. And like the other announcement recently where we were denied access into the metadata for platforms like Elmhurst and Stroma, where you can't get the metadata behind the EPC anymore. That was quite important. That was quite a cool thing to be able to do. If someone's, you'll appreciate this one, Tim, as well. If someone's EPC says it's got a combi boiler, that's not really good enough. What we need is access to the full SEDBUC database to say it's a Potterton combi XYZ 1, 2, 3 and it's 92% efficient. That lets you do much more dynamic things with the analysis and roadmap in a much more pragmatic, sensible way with a hard known. So the government made that illegal and said you can't access that now over copyright rules. So that made retrofits a little bit harder for everyone. The bills being denied to everyone makes it really difficult because now what we have to do is go to every single tenant and ask for permission for 12 months bills. And no one's got it because everyone's online. They forgot their password. They can't log in. They don't know what a kilowatt is. It makes life a little bit harder for us. But the tenant, there's also, I'm on a steering group with the Green Finance Institute trying to bring around green rental agreements. I'm trying to get Greta Thunberg in there. So in my head, I'm calling them green rental energy tenancy agreements. I'm calling them Greta agreements. Just my own pleasure, really. But that's an agreement that can be appended to any a tenancy agreement that says, look, you will behave as a responsible tenant. You will give us access. We will invest in that property to make it better, but we will share savings. The landlord gets some savings. The tenant gets some savings. And it's trying to understand the financial mechanisms. But bizarrely, there's not funding these retrofits isn't a problem. I know we were just acquired by Mears. We're now a big company, but fundamentally we're still a small company. And we have access to £7 billion to fund these things through a variety of different measures. We've got access now via Mears to lots of contracting that can physically do it. And we've got the data to say, look, we know what needs to be done. The problem now is the tenant, the client's already moving quick enough. So if we say, look, we've run your 30,000 portfolio through our software, and you qualify for about £12 million worth of Eco4 funding right now, they might not make a decision for 12 months, by which time everything's changed. We've got a new Prime Minister. She changes all the rules and energy costs go up. The price cap changes. PAS comes on board and everything changes. So we really need the market to get better data, kick it into shape, augment it, merge it, do exactly what Tim was saying, get PAS 2035, embrace it. LiDAR's a great tool. We've done LiDAR surveys in the past, Tim. We've done boroscopes, Matterport surveys, all that kind of stuff. You cannot have enough data.
No.
It really informs the decision, but people need to appreciate that and cost and plan for it, because it might add £1,000 or £2,000 to a project that they thought was a £5,000 project, and actually it's £7,000, but it's £7,000 spent wisely and done properly. I'll stop talking. Sorry, I'm talking too much.
No, it's not at all. It's all valuable information, literally. And Andrew, step in there. I mean, I saw you nodding quite a bit. Like, what's your take on this?
Well, I mean, everything that's said so far is all the things that swirl around in my head when we talk about this. It's not just about the data. It's about all the other things that go towards producing that data, storing that data. Half the problem we have in our industry has been that data is created and then is lost. It's either lost because you're not allowed to store it, it's not allowed to be shared, it's incompatible data, or it belongs to somebody, or it sits somewhere separate that nobody else has access to. Energy assessors have long been criticised for many things, but one of the issues that they would dearly love to be able to solve is accessing really credible, reusable data, so that they don't have to start from scratch every time they do something, and they can use data that actually has that can be moved forward and reused, so that they're not using defaults and things like that, and that would make a huge difference in our world. Education is absolutely key. I think I heard that from Tim and from Hermione. If people don't know how to use their buildings or the building that they occupy, now, what chance have they got when things change? We're going to almost reset how these buildings perform, and the way that people need to interact with them will change. It's about engagement, it's about education, and it's about putting it in terms that people can appreciate and want to understand. And half the battle is sort of like getting them to understand the why. Why is it interesting? Why is it important? Why is it useful? What's in it for them? If we can get that right, that's kind of half the battle here. And I completely agree on Bill's. I should have mentioned the word Green Deal, or the phrase Green Deal, but actually that taught me an awful lot about the challenges that we had ahead for us. If we learned nothing else from Green Deal, there were some good ideas in there, but there were some real challenges to try and face. And actually acquiring and getting hold of energy bills was jolly difficult. Because people didn't understand them. They didn't really care about them. They as long as they could afford them, that was really all that mattered. And they didn't really appreciate the technical terms in there. And there is some real, technical items to understand within an energy bill. What's a kilowatt hour? Why is gas different from electricity? Well, what's the journey looking like when we look ahead? Why am I still on gas? Why can't I go to a heat pump? Why should I go to a heat pump? And that all sort of flows from understanding your energy bills. So it's not just about the data. The data is so key, but it's actually doing things that mean things to people with that data, and then our industry being able to use that data in a smarter way and having access to it all. As Stuart has sort of alluded to, there are some real challenges around accessing something simple like EPC data, which for me it's all kind of wrapped up in GDPR and some old legal framework that needs to be challenged and broken apart and reset. I think it isn't GDPR related, because there's no personal data in there. It's all about the asset. But ultimately, the legal framework was written in 2006, 2007, and has never been looked at since. And it has been subsequently found to be illegal to share the data for reasons that nobody really understands. It's stuff like that we've got to break down and now is the time to do it, because if we don't do it now, we're in a difficult place.
Sounds like transparency and collaboration is actually quite important.
Absolutely.
I was going to say, so we're also, I think, live on LinkedIn at the moment, and we've got a question from LinkedIn in terms of what kind of impact are data and metrics having on policy? I mean, I say question from LinkedIn from somebody on LinkedIn. So in that respect, who would like to answer that in terms of the policy element? Would you?
I'm happy to give a couple of thoughts around PAS 2035 on that, Dhruti. I mean, it's clear within PAS 2035 that monitoring is, it's a really important part of it. I would say our experience, I mean, we've done 5,000 measures on Trustmark now for PAS 2035, so we're pretty experienced at it. I would say that Trustmark have to date probably been a little bit light on auditing on monitoring and evaluation. I know that it's going to, I know it's coming. We're all aware of it, and rightly so, because it's in PAS 2035. I think from a PAS 2035 retrofit coordinator perspective, I'd quite like to see a little bit more definition, almost a standard around what's the minimum standard of data collection that we're going to require for each property. Because Hermione will be the first to agree that there's lots of different services out there for data, and we're collecting our own data, which actually can feed in with hers. The two aren't mutually exclusive.
No.
Well, they sort of are at the moment, but they shouldn't be.
No.
So I think it would, from a policy point of view, I would like to see a little bit more guidance out there around this. This is the minimum standard we want from you to deliver under PAS 2035. I appreciate there is currently no retrofit evaluator specific role. There's no training around it. I gather it's probably in the works with the Retrofit Academy. So the coordinator is primarily responsible for that at the moment. But we're also at the beginning of this journey. PAS gets an annual update, so these things are changing, and the Retrofit Academy's just launched its level 4 for training retrofit assessors. And I think that's brilliant, because the coordinators are level 5. So we're sending every one of our assessors on the level 4 course at the Retrofit Academy, because it's a massive step up in their understanding of what they're looking at. I'll give you an example of why I think this is important. We're working on a project with a local authority, let's just say somewhere centralish in the country, and under RDSAP, it's a 1970s place. There's one primary build type, which is system build. And so the software will spit out system build, that's it. With our architect partners, because we put boots on the ground, the software is vitally important, but you can't software your way out of PAS 2035. You've got to have a combination of people and software, in our opinion. We've identified over 200 sub archetypes of system build of the one build type, and therefore, just by extrapolation, every single design we're doing is bespoke for that property, as it should be. But if you didn't have that level of data input and bother to go and visit the sites, you could do a generic design for all of them, but 199 of them probably aren't right. So, and this will come out later in the monitoring when people aren't getting the performance that they've been told to expect from the improvements to their properties. So yeah, that's a long-winded answer. I'd like to see a bit more joined up thinking around policy, and to actually set some standards to say this is mandatory.
Yeah, and I think I would agree with Tim. I think that the policy flywheel is really only just getting started. There is been quite a lot of stated ambitions around various processes, PAS 2035, and other processes for regulating quality in building. And the stated ambitions are around what we do with monitored data. And it tends to, if you look at things like, even the guidance on the first wave of the SHDF, it tends to be expressed in slightly vague terms as to what monitoring actually is. Then there are now standards out there. The BSI have just developed a standard with the Building Performance Network for monitoring and evaluation, particularly applicable to things like post-occupancy evaluation, that tells you quite helpfully the sort of tools you should be using, the sort of situations you should be using them in, and what you might be looking at. It's not really relevant to retrofit programs yet, but I think there's only a matter of time before policy starts to get involved with creating some proper standards and some proper processes that you would look to for what your minimum data gathering in terms of the environmental data and the data on site would be.
It's really helpful, actually. And in terms of Andrew, is there anything further to add in terms of policy and what's perhaps going on now? Like, are people actually listening to the data when it comes to policy that our audience needs to be aware of?
Well, I think they are to an extent. The challenge we've got is that we don't have a national retrofitting strategy at the moment. We don't have anything that sits above everything, saying this is what we're going to do, guys. This is the waypoints along the way. Where do we need to be at what time? I think we all understand that 2050 and net zero are sort of end goals there. Fuel poverty is another sort of massive driver, obviously, right now in the here and now of the energy crisis. But we need to bring it all together. There are lots of sort of policies in the offing or that are in consultation at the moment that have been in consultation hell for many years. Things like minimum energy efficiency standards is a huge driver of and one metric that everyone seems to be very, very focused on, but we've not had clarity yet. So everyone's going for EPCC by a date, whatever that date ends up being. The reality is it needs to be more than that by a certain date. And we need that kind of clarity. It is quite remarkable that once we set something like fairly innocuous, like minimum energy efficiency standards within the PRS sector, how wide that sort of net starts to cast itself over other sectors and other parts of the industry. Like the lenders suddenly go, well, we need to be lending in a more responsible way, or we need to be pushing our customers to be more energy efficient, and it forms part of their ESG stuff as well. So it's absolutely crucial that the government now, and perhaps more controversially, I would say, it shouldn't matter what government's in place or in power, that this is non-negotiable. This is something that all governments now and in the future get behind, which is this strategy in order to get the 29 million buildings in this country from where they are today to a net zero situation and alleviate as much as possible fuel poverty. All I hear from government right now is that they want to do that in the most cost-effective way, whatever that means. So yeah, data will help inform government where they draw those lines and how quickly and how much funding and what buttons and what levers to start pulling at. Without it, they can't do that job. I'm assured, speaking to Bays, that they have all of that information and they have got strategies and they have got policies coming down the line. But as we know, something like a prime minister coming in and pressing the reset button, it happens and is happening. So we're sort of in this semi-holding pattern at the moment, waiting for some certainty. Sounds pretty pessimistic, and I don't mean it to be. There are huge opportunities as well, obviously, whenever anything changes.
Can I add a little bit to that conversation as well, Dhruti?
Yeah, no, do. And then I've got a question for you as well that's come in, I think specifically for you. So go ahead.
Okay. There's a really good book by Yuval Harari called Sapiens, and there's a sequel to it called Sapiens Deus. In Sapiens Deus, there's a line in it that stuck with me forever. And it just said, politics moves so slowly and technology moves so quickly that politics is now largely irrelevant. And we need to embrace that as well. But one of the comments I wanted to make was about the humans. I was on a phone call, Tim, with 29 retrofit assessors. And the conversation, I was just listening, and the conversation was going down the lines of everyone wasn't bothering visiting site. All they were doing was taking photographs from contractors and signing them off. And I couldn't resist. I had to interrupt and say, look, we don't do that. We do it properly. We outsource to a respectable PAS 20, and everything's done, and it costs money.
Yeah.
And someone put in the comments, Stuart Little doesn't live in the real world, doesn't live in the commercial world. And I thought the ethos, the whole point was we visit site and we do it properly. But Hermione, you might laugh at this comment as well. We had a client who gave us 13,000 houses, lots of different platforms. I think he had about 15 different places where his data was. We put all these data in one place, aggregated it, augmented it, run it through the latest version of SAP, and picked up the phone to him to say, look, now that we've done that, if we run your data on column, whatever it was, J, all your houses have got gas central heating and we can't bring you any funding. If we go along 5 columns and we run it on column Z or whatever, Q, it says 50% of your houses have got storage heaters and they're on electric with immersion heaters and things like that. So which column is true? And what he responded was, he responded and said, don't dare challenge my data, and hung up. We need human beings that accept that their data is not always right. We've got one client who's got 3 guys called Jim, and they don't like each other and they don't speak to each other. But we went into the office, we spoke to all the Jims, we got all the spreadsheets, we put them all together, and there was a really simple conflict with one spreadsheet said all the glazing is single glazed, Jim 2's data said all of our glazing is double glazed, and Jim 3's spreadsheet said all of our data is triple glazed. And we just asked the question, said, well, what's true? And they just all argued with each other. And we need people to kind of pull their head out the sand and just accept the data is not perfect, and need to pull their head out the sand and just crack on. It's one of the things I find the most frustrating in this sector is there's an awful lot of talk and pontification about it, and the planet's on fire. We need to hurry up and get this thing fixed.
I'd hope that Andrew's auditing would pick up assessors that are behaving like that, because that's outrageous. As an organisation, we employ 2 full-time staff who look at every single retrofit assessment that comes in, and any photograph that's out of focus, or the room's not properly lit, or whatever it is, the slightest deviation away from our prescribed methodology, the assessor goes back. It doesn't happen very often because we've now got really, really good behaviour from them. They get very well paid by us and they know what we expect from them. But without that, what you're describing can easily happen. But also, we make our coordinators available to our assessors every day because they should have questions on site. I think if you go weeks without assessors calling you to ask questions if they're not sure about something on site, something's fundamentally wrong. We get lots of calls from our assessors because they need a little bit of confirmation about something. We have do a video call with them. They can show us something, and one of our coordinators will say, I'm happy with that evidence, or no, it could be this. Okay, if we're not sure, we'll contact Stroma and say, get onto their technical and say, what should we be putting down here? Is it this or this? Because actually it falls between 2 camps here. I'm not quite sure. And absolutely, the days of drive past EPCs I thought were long gone. I'm pretty shocked to hear what you're saying, to be fair.
Yeah, we did about 225 retrofit assessments in the north of England recently, Tim, and 31 of them said they're suitable for underfloor insulation. And when our contractors got to site and stood on the floor, they were concrete. There are still really basic, fundamental things like that happen. Mistakes happen, but it's all the quality of that guy. Some of the assessors just want to be in and out in 30 minutes, and that's it. And some of them are doing it properly. The price normally dictates who's doing it properly,
I think you both just sort of helped here. So we had a question and comment from John Johnson, who'd said, it's quite clear from listening to the speakers that there's a highly technical data-driven approach to accessing properties, even to the point of developing a specific upgrades based on each unit, as explained in 200 variations of a system-built house. But are installers genuinely able to be so exacting in how each one is treated? So it feels like there is actually possibilities but it's about making that effort and making sure that the organizations involved are also making that effort, as well as the onus being on the individuals that are hired in these roles. I've also got another question I wanted to sort of tap into. She says, but trying to bring the questions up. It's from Wasim, saying somebody, I think actually that might have been you, Stuart. Somebody mentioned the troubles around access to housing. Based on your experience, do you undertake any finance solutions in this space that require ongoing maintenance? And how is that issue with access dealt with? So how can we answer, Wasim?
Yeah, we've got one funder that's got 4 billion to invest in retrofits, and it's an off-balance sheet pay-as-you-save model. Dhruti, where the client, if we say, look, we can lend you £200 million, that money goes into an SPV, and the client can draw it down as and when they're doing the works. But the special purpose vehicle owns, operates, manages, and maintains all of those assets until the debt is fully serviced. So the tenant saves, say, 10 or 20% of the savings day one, 80 to 90% of the savings service the debt. And then after the debt's serviced, all the assets revert to the asset register of the housing provider for £1. So it's a nice off-balance sheet, low-risk way to do it, but they need access to everything throughout the duration of that contract. So it's in the T's and C's that they must be given access to the PV, the inverters, but they're responsible for the EWI and everything we install because they're paying for it. They literally own it until it's paid for. So there are mechanisms that exist to give access.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the any long-term finance measure of that sort is ultimately there to deliver benefits, not just to the landlord, but also to deliver benefits to the tenant. So shrewd landlords will make sure that the data that is being collected from that home and the access arrangements about getting at that data are explicitly written into those agreements that give the tenants a long-term benefit. So it is, it should be fundamental to the design of all of those sorts of packages.
That's great. I'm just going to give a shout out to Peter, who says that he's really enjoying this discussion and as much first-hand experience of the inaccuracies of EPC data. I'm going to have a question to follow, so get it in there, Peter. Also, thank you for the recommendation for Sapiens. I just want to actually ask all of you. There was, I mentioned earlier, and it's a thread that's running through in terms of you can't have data without having the humans involved as well, but also this element of bad data. What is good data and bad data, and is that sort of very a black and white area, or is it quite sort of nuanced, that element of what you should be careful of looking out for?
For me, it's quite clear, because I think there's a real challenge here around the panel here who are embracing qualitative data, where you have programs where historic EPC data is used to sample retrofit program sort of measures. If we're following along using full SAP and BIM modeling and energy modeling, because the starting point is generally wrong. I mean, we've been modeling almost all of our properties down an EPC band for the purposes of the SHDF, because our energy modeling is showing that they're all wrong, or the vast majority of them are. And so if you've got some people starting with EPC data to work their program out, and we're starting with SAP data, actually where you get to at the end, you might well find that the intended outcomes are simply not hitting what you think it is, because by the time you've got to the end, you're using good data because you've actually done the job, having based it on really poor data at the beginning. And I think there's an issue there around a sort of consistency of approach. Yeah. But there's also an inevitability, as I said earlier, that all these asset management systems are going to move at speed over into a digital environment. The BIM environment, that's the government's intention. So we're all going to be forced to embrace this, and the sooner organizations, HAs and LAs, start to integrate this in with their current systems, the better. And what it'll show is simply how poor a lot of the existing data is, and we know it because we look at asset lists every day, all day long. And we've got sampling of EPCs that don't exist, and programs are being put forward on that. It's madness, but people have to use the tools that they have in hand at the moment. And so we can all see here that that's deeply unsatisfactory and frustrating, but we've got to go through this period of awareness and building up and bring people on board and try and break down the sort of silo. We're very aware there's often siloed decision making within organizations where planned maintenance don't necessarily talk with responsive maintenance and retrofit, the retrofit departments that are now being formed at last, which is great. But actually, you'll get better results if people start talking together. And we're all talking about collaboration out there within the market. I mean, we're working with, relevant to this call, we're working with Kia on a large SHDF job. And this is how it needs to be, because the supply chain isn't mature enough for what we need at the moment. We have to collaborate across companies on it.
Yeah,
I think is the way forward.
I think
just jump in into some extent the defence of the EPC. I'll start by just differentiating. An EPC as an outcome is a report, and it could be, blue, pink, green, could say this today, could say something else tomorrow. That's actually within the gift of those that look after the EPC in government. It's the methodologies that sit behind that the things that really, really matter. RD, SAP and SAP, we haven't really spoken too much about RD, SAP, but they're all very capable methodologies if they're used appropriately, and they do produce good data. It's just the resolution of that data in some usage cases needs to be higher, needs to be better, for want of a phrase. The data that we get from RD, SAP and SAP is useful, is very useful for making decisions, but it is about the usage case, and it's about how much time and effort can be dedicated to making that data more accurate. So, for example, if I wanted to alleviate the need for using any default in RD SAP, I could. It would take me time and effort and cost, but we could do it, and that would make the data better if the usage case required it. Let's not forget, EPCs and the methodologies behind them came around because of regulation that said we needed to be able to measure the efficiency of our buildings, our housing stock, for sale or rental. That was the very basic sort of starting point. It's very difficult, and I don't think it's particularly fair to use where we are now and compare to what was happening 10, 15 years ago, and the data that was produced then, let alone the methodologies have changed massively since then. But we're somehow still using that data to make decisions today, as Tim is sort of saying. That's clearly ridiculous. We shouldn't be doing that. We should be updating data far more regularly, and most of that needs to happen on site, and it needs to be happening with an accuracy and accuracy first, quality first approach. But that doesn't withhold the need or the virtue of bringing in other data sources to help inform things like RD, SAP and SAP and override those defaults. And that comes back to my original point, is if we could have access to that data without any barriers and any boundaries, all of a sudden we've got a far more useful methodology, because it can be kept up to date more regularly. It can be better informed. It can use better data to itself make it a better methodology. And I'll stop defending it.
I think there are some useful lessons that we can learn from the journey the EPC has gone on, and they will be usefully applied, in fact, with the growing marketplace in monitored data and data coming out of housing, which at the moment is, I think we all need to think carefully about the quality of the data that's being collected. A little story. When we first started Parametrics, and we were interested in commercial buildings, and we wanted to look at what was the performance of commercial buildings loosely, we thought we could use the data from existing building management systems to do some of the modeling, some of the metric development we wanted to do. We couldn't, because, yes, partly because it was hedged about, but also because actually it was being collected in the wrong place, at the wrong resolution. It was not the right metric. The sensors were drifting and were all over the shop. So even when it comes to what I would typically think of as being the unarguable data that comes from measurement in a building, you need to be aware of the context in which those measurements are being made and the quality of that data before that influences the metrics that's being generated there.
So we are coming to time. We've got 10 minutes, but we have had some questions come in that I just want to see if we can try and get answered. I think Katie's questions actually sort of we've come together to answer that, which she'd asked, if we're agreed that EPC data is often bad data, do the panelists have any suggestions about how, when, if we can have a retrofit system that is not reliant on EPC? So I think we've sort of started a conversation around that. So I'm going to go to Peter's question, and then we have another one from someone called Emma. So Peter's just saying, there's a lot of discussion rightly around fabric improvements. How much effort is going towards better insulated properties using resistive electric heating, e.g. blocks of flats? Is anyone able to answer that? And then I'll go to Emma's question.
I've put my answers in the chat, Dhruti.
For Peter. Oh, awesome. You asked Speedy Gonzalez. It's all good. So I'm going to go to Emma, who's in Q&As, in terms of what approach do you think would have the most success in ensuring that the funding is granted to allow and actually goes towards data collection and impact evaluation? Who are the key players in that who should be targeted? So in that respect, Stuart, do you want to, is that something that you can answer?
Yeah, the utility companies are still important in this space as well. I know that they are the purse holders with the EPCs, and they're selling the energy, so it'd be important for them to be involved in that. Sorry, I missed the thread of the question there. I think I was reading things in the side.
There's a lot going on in terms of who are the key players that should be targeted when it comes to funding, data collection, and impact evaluation?
Yeah. So funding, there are changes in Eco 4 that allow utility companies to spend a little bit of their obligation on things like innovation. So if you can survey in an innovative way, like some of the things Tim was talking about, LiDAR and things is quite creative and different. Thermal imaging is a bit different. Quantifying this is a bit different. The kind of things that is say.
I think we've lost
4%. Persuading them to spend that, but it has to have a benefit for them. It has to unlock an easier way to deploy.
I might be losing Stuart here. Has it gone quiet? I think we got the gist of that. It's
worth also mentioning on that, of course, Dhruti, that there is a specific funding around digitalisation in the last wave of the SHDF that's associated with that. Finally, I think it's worth looking at it. That question goes slightly to the business case. The business case for better data, and we all need to work better at explaining what the business case is for managing your retrofit projects more efficiently and making sure that they are better targeted, because there is a genuine business case in its own right that I think is not very often discussed around making sure that retrofits are well targeted and they're doing the right thing.
I think that's really, really helpful advice, actually. I'm going to just give one more question in, and then I think we're going to have to start sort of heading towards closing down. I think Alan's question is quite interesting in terms of policy, although, I'm checking, Tim, you hadn't answered that one yet. Is my understanding of the VAT situation correct? If design work is undertaken by the installer, then it's 0% rated, but overall assessment, coordination and design undertaken independently is standard rate. If so, is that an area to push for change? Otherwise, it encourages clients to roll compliance into contracts rather than lead with proper data-led whole house plans. Is that something that you've all come across?
Yeah, I mean, I think, listen, I leave it to my financial department, but I think the VAT thing for the larger schemes is actually, it doesn't really come into play, in my opinion, because if the rate's 20%, the RP will claim back 20%. If it's 5%, they'll claim back 5%. I think this is more applicable to individual homeowners, where the lower VAT rate will help them put energy efficiency measures in, because they're not going to be able to claim the VAT back. So for the work we're involved in, actually, I think the VAT thing is I don't think it has a particular impact. Just for Peter on his question about PV on solar rooftops, yes, I completely agree with that. And I know there's one company out there who are pushing quite hard around solar PV on high-rise blocks, where they can split the bills in between the individual flats. They can monitor that. The name doesn't come to me at the moment, but I'm sure you can find them. So people are starting to think about this, because solar PV is such a powerful measure, in my opinion. I think it's a great measure. We should be, we've got to embrace it. We've got to decarbonise.
Agreed. Thank you, Andrew, for answering Paul's question about the RDSAP as well. So that's really helpful. So at the moment, there's quite a few answers within the chat as well, if you've had any questions. Stuart's still in the background, so that's good. I'm not quite sure what Peter's on about there, but I'm going to let Tim.
Yeah. No, I think he's probably right there. It rings a bell. I'm not an agent for him. I'm not on commission.
Just to come in on Paul's question about our new version of RDSAP. Yes, there is a new version coming next year. We don't have a date yet, but it will be middle towards the end of next year, possibly. In fact, I have a meeting tomorrow talking about RDSAT 10 and what's going to be in it. The mantra is more accuracy, more data points, working on moving some of those assumptions around so that they better represent the majority of buildings, and then being able to adapt them where we need to. I can't give in any specifics because it's all in the air at the moment, but watch this space, and Stroma and Pepper members will be getting some really juicy news out in the coming months.
Are we also going to see an upskilling in DEA, the DEA qualification alongside that, Andrew?
It is part of the discussion, yeah. The last time we did it, there was some fairly fundamental changes to the wider piece. So Green Deal and Eco were coming into being, feed-in tariff, etc. There isn't necessarily anything like that at the moment, but I think we all appreciate that there needs to be probably a line in the sand drawn, and everybody needs to be at that point at a certain point in time. I think if we start looking at things like incorporating condition into the equation, and I'm not saying in RDSAT 10 we will, but I think that's a point in time where we need to do it. We have been doing it with retrofit assessors in a more informal way because of a lack of qualification at the start of the process when PAS 2035 was released. But I think an energy assessor plus scenario is definitely got its merits.
Fantastic. On that note, I shall say thank you very much to our esteemed panelists. So we have Hermione Crease, who still remains co-founder of environmental data company Parametrics, Andrew Parkin, Managing Director of Stroma Certification and Chair of Pepper Property Energy Professionals Association, Tim Freeman of Energy Specifics, and Stuart Little, founder and CEO of IRT Surveys, which is part of the MEARS Group. So thank you all so very, very much. Just want to say that we will be writing up a roundup of the key messages from today's session. So if you're not already, please do follow us on LinkedIn or on the website Elemental UK for all our latest updates. This festival continues. I think this webinar alone could have been much, much longer. But for more details on all the other sessions, please do check out our website. We have another one this afternoon, which is looking after models for whole house retrofit. So ties in very nice and complements what we've got today. And just a reminder, this is a CPD accredited session, so do log those hours. And thank you all very, very much. Lots to ponder on. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks for coming. Cheers.